Coming up, U.S. consumer prices rose by 0.1% in August, and when it comes to on-year, it's 8.3%. The country was hoping for a fall this month with the plunging gas prices, but inflation remains stubborn. This has also led markets to fall across the world. The U.S. Department of Defense says it will closely work with its allies to deter North Korea's nuclear threat. This comes as last week, Pyongyang passed a law that allows the North to use nuclear weapons preemptively when threatened. Squid Game wins 2 more awards at the 74th Primetime Emmy Awards, snagging 2 prizes: Outstanding Lead Actor in a Drama Series and Outstanding Directing for a Drama Series. The 2 winners make history by becoming the first Asians to win in those categories.
Good morning. Welcome to New Day at Arirang. We begin as fresh data shows that U.S. consumer prices saw another jump last month, dashing hopes of a nascent slowdown with gas prices plunging recently.
That's right, and on the back of the report, pundits are predicting another historically large interest rate hike coming from the country's central bank. And there was more bad news as U.S. stocks reacted with a sharp downturn on Tuesday. Kim Yo-sun starts us off.
The U.S. Consumer Price Index unexpectedly rose by 8.3% on year in August. According to data released by the Bureau of Labor Statistics on Tuesday, the core CPI, which excludes volatile food and energy costs, climbed 6.3% from the same month last year. This was a 0.1% increase in overall inflation from July, while core inflation rose 0.6% on month. Pundits had been expecting a decline of 0.1% for overall inflation, with a rise of 0.3% for core inflation. They now believe that the U.S. Central Bank will remain aggressive in its tightening of monetary policy. The inflation report was one of the last pieces of information on inflation that the Fed will see prior to its September meeting, where policymakers are expected to deliver their 3rd consecutive 0.75 percentage point rate hike to curb inflation. Despite concerns that continued rate hikes may tip the country's economy into recession, Fed Chair Jerome Powell stressed last week that he is, quote, strongly committed to bringing inflation down. Following the release of the August inflation report, U.S. stocks fell sharply on Tuesday. The Dow Jones Industrial Average slid nearly 4%, while the S&P 500 and the tech-heavy Nasdaq sank by more than 4% and 5% respectively. Only 5 stocks in the S&P 500 ended the day in positive territory. Kim Yo-sun, Arirang News.
South Korea aims to stabilize supply chains in key industries by taking part in the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. The Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy held a briefing after the first in-person IPEF ministerial meeting held in Los Angeles last week. 14 countries discussed ways to cooperate amid economic uncertainties and agreed on a joint declaration of 4 pillars, including trade, supply chains, clean energy and anti-corruption. Among these areas, Seoul plans to share its decarbonisation technologies while expanding opportunities for Korean companies to advance into overseas markets. Joining the US-led pact is looked to provide improvements in trade, as the new initiative aims to engage in new types of models like the digital economy and climate change. US President Joe Biden signed an executive order Monday to boost domestic manufacturing of biotech products. While the move is aimed at countering China's growing presence in the industry, it could also hurt South Korean companies. Choi Min-jung explains further.
The United States is taking further action to strengthen its domestic manufacturing, this time in the biotech industry. U.S. President Joe Biden on Monday signed an executive order to launch a national biotechnology and biomanufacturing initiative. The White House says the initiative aims to expand domestic biomanufacturing capacity so that what's invented in the U.S. is made in the U.S. as well.
We need to manufacture advanced biotechnologies here in the United States. That's why today I signed an executive order that directs the federal government to ensure biotechnologies invented in the United States of America are made in the United States of America.
The White House also added that this will keep prices low and supply chains strong. However, this doesn't seem to be its only goal. The act is also aimed at reducing the country's reliance on China. U.S. national security and intelligence officials have been growingly concerned with Beijing's aggressive investment in biotech, saying it poses risks to U.S. leadership and competitiveness. The initiative may also impact related companies in South Korea.
First of all, South Korea has global competitiveness in terms of providing manufacturing services. However, if the U.S. was to strengthen domestic manufacturing, the competitiveness of Korean companies like Samsung Biologics could be weakened.
On the other hand, with China as South Korea's biggest competitor, there are also views that the initiative may even benefit Korean companies.
If South Korea makes more diplomatic and industrial efforts, there could be more advantages. So there are both pros and cons.
The latest initiative comes following Biden's push to bolster domestic manufacturing of batteries and semiconductors, which is already a concern for South Korean companies. The White House is set to discuss and announce further details on the biomanufacturing initiative, including its investment plans, on Wednesday. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
Germany has decided to step up lending to energy firms that are at risk of being crushed by soaring gas prices. The country's cabinet is expected to approve a draft legislation on Wednesday, guaranteeing up to $68 billion. Last week, VNG, one of Germany's largest importers of Russian natural gas, became the latest energy firm to ask for government aid. The move comes as Europe prepares for proposals to help households and industry cope with an energy crisis sparked by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Meanwhile, the EU securities watchdog is also mulling over measures to help energy firms struggling to meet rocketing collateral demands. The Yoon administration is pushing to cut further spending through legislation, and the Finance Ministry's goal is keeping the deficit-to-GDP ratio under 3%. Jeong has the further details.
Amid concerns that South Korea's national debt could be getting out of control, the government is pushing to tighten its belt with stronger fiscal rules. At an emergency economic ministers meeting on Tuesday, Finance Minister Chu Kyung-ho said the new rules to rein in the country's spending should be put into effect as soon as the legislation process is complete at the National Assembly.
The new fiscal rules will be included in the National Finance Act in order for them to be legally binding. As soon as they are passed at the National Assembly, they will be applied to the following budget bill.
Under the new rules, the Finance Ministry aims to keep the ratio of the country's deficit to gross domestic product at under 3%. In other words, each year's government spending minus income, excluding certain programs, cannot be more than 3% of GDP. This is down from about 5% set for this year. And if the debt-to-GDP ratio, a barometer for the country's ability to pay back its debts, exceeds 60%, the government is expected to adjust that target to 2% or less. However, exceptions will be made in times of war, disaster, or economic crisis. With roughly $730 billion in outstanding debt, the national debt-to-GDP ratio is expected to be around 50% this year. This is up from 35.9% in 2018, led higher mostly by the government's expansionary fiscal policy to deal with the fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic. Currently, among the 38 OECD member countries, South Korea and Turkey are only countries that do not apply fiscal rules. The previous administration had also come up with similar fiscal rules, but they were not put into law because they were proposed with a 3-year grace period. An expert says the government should keep the national debt in check.
It is dangerous to significantly expand the fiscal budget amid soaring inflationary pressure. However, the government should keep supporting the socially vulnerable and low-income households with the increase in the budget.
Jeong, Arirang News.
The U.S. Department of Defense has affirmed that it will work closely with its allies to secure nuclear deterrence against North Korea. During a press briefing on Tuesday, Pentagon spokesman Patrick Ryder said the U.S. possessed verified policies and procedures on nuclear deterrence, including close cooperation with international allies. Ryder's comments were in response to a question on whether the U.S. and South Korea were ready to respond to a potential North Korean nuclear attack. Last week, North Korea passed a new law allowing preemptive nuclear strikes if the leadership comes under attack. South Korea and the U.S. are set to discuss measures to strengthen nuclear deterrence during the Extended Deterrence Strategy and Consultation Group's high-level meeting in Washington, D.C. on Friday. As just mentioned, last week, North Korea passed a new law that hinted at the possibility of preemptive nuclear strikes. In response, Seoul's Defense Ministry warned the regime that such a move will only lead to self-destruction. Peunji has the full story.
Seoul's Defense Ministry has sent a clear warning to North Korea after the regime passed a law on its nuclear policy last week that authorizes the use of its nuclear weapons preemptively.
North Korea will face overwhelming responses from South Korea and the U.S. if it attempts to use nuclear weapons. We are warning North Korea that this will lead to a path of self-destruction for the regime.
North Korea's state-run Korean Central News Agency said last Thursday that its parliament passed a law that allows the use of nuclear weapons preemptively, should the regime be about to face a nuclear strike itself. This permits the North's military to execute nuclear strikes if its leadership comes under attack. In response, Seoul's Unification Ministry also stressed that it's not willing to make any changes to its denuclearization policy. Speaking to reporters on Tuesday, an official from the ministry said although Kim Jong-un has expressed strong disapproval about denuclearization, South Korea will continue to work on creating an environment where the North will give up its nuclear weapons. The official also said the regime needs to realize that this kind of usage of nuclear arms not only poses a threat to the Korean peninsula, but also has a negative impact on the North's already struggling economy. The warning from South Korea also comes at a time when North Korea appears to have completed its preparations to conduct a nuclear test for the first time since 2017. Peunji, Arirang News.
Now, turning to the pandemic situation here in South Korea, the country saw a big jump in COVID-19 cases on the first day back from the Korean Thanksgiving Chuseok holiday. From midnight to 9 p.m. Tuesday, the country reported more than 90,000 cases, showing an increase of more than 36,000 cases from the day before. Health authorities say the uptick is mainly due to more tests being done after the holiday. It also comes as more people were traveling, with virus regulations for Chuseok eased for the first time in 3 years. However, officials are saying the uptick is temporary and daily cases will eventually trend downward. Last week, new infections dropped by nearly 20% compared to the week before. A simultaneous outbreak of COVID-19 and the flu can be expected this fall, partly due to waning immunity to both diseases. As part of preventive measures, experts call for a comprehensive medical response system. Lee Seung-jae has more on the Twindemic warning.
According to data compiled by the Korea Disease Control and Prevention Agency, the number of patients displaying flu symptoms came to 4.7 for every 1,000 outpatients between August 28th and September 3rd. The figure shows a steady increase from the 3.3 reported 4 weeks earlier. With the continuous rise in the number of flu patients and a waning immunity on COVID-19, health experts warned that a simultaneous outbreak of COVID-19 and seasonal influenza, dubbed a twindemic, could hit South Korea over this fall and winter. And now, they're calling for a thorough medical response system to be in place in the event of such an outbreak. Experts say a COVID-19 surge coinciding with the spread of flu could cause major confusion and could result in a rapid increase of serious cases that could affect the medical system nationwide. One solution, they say, is the need for a PCR test designed to detect the flu and COVID-19 at the same time, as antigen tests have limitations. And this is all the more important as there are individual treatments in place for both COVID-19 and the flu. With the country set to enter the first winter season without social distancing rules since the COVID-19 outbreak, experts are also calling for a vaccination plan for people to be able to get the COVID-19 and flu vaccines together. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
It's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into some of the key issues in the spotlight right now. While South Korea's current wave of COVID-19 infections is on a decline, South Korea's top health official said on Tuesday that the country will be seeing an increase in the rate of infections following the long Chuseok holiday.
He's also warned of a potential twindemic when COVID-19 and seasonal flu start spreading at the same time. So what does this mean for the country and what can people do to protect themselves? We have Kim Seung-taek, head and professor of Zoonotic Virus Laboratory at Institute Pasteur Korea with us today. Good morning, welcome back.
Good morning.
First, the rate of infections, according to the health agency, is set to go up temporarily. How serious will the spread of infections do you think is going to be?
Well, as you mentioned, after the Chuseok holidays, many people just get together from many parts of this country, and then they share food and then chat, and this is really just a good situation for viruses to transmit. So as officials said, that we have observed the less than one basic reproduction number for the last couple of just weeks. So we may see a surge of some COVID-19, but may not the huge surge. But we do not know for sure how just the magnitude of this surge. All this is just caused by at this moment we do not see any more just a variant. So that most of this magnitude will be determined by our behavior. So we will see.
And Professor, South Korea saw the worst of the pandemic earlier this year, and are people that were infected then, like Toyon and myself, actually now at risk of reinfection?
Right, exactly. And before we're talking about some reinfection, I have to tell just a little bit about just immunity that we actually just raised after, whether it is a vaccination or just a natural infection. There are two aspects of immunity. One is antibody generation, and the second one is cellular just immunity. So the key factor just regarding some reinfection is the actually neutralizing antibody that we actually raised against these viruses. So based on all the clinical evidences and then any data that we have actually observed in the past 2 years is that after actually a couple of months after infection or just that vaccination, our the chance of reinfection is actually increased, and that's mostly due to some waning immunity, mostly due to some waning titer of neutralizing antibody. So basically, we can be very vulnerable to reinfection, but the person by person, there might be some differences. But the good thing is that cellular immunity is very long-lasting and then very robust. So even just after reinfection, if we got the immunity, whether it is by just infection or just a vaccination, we will still be well protected from some severe COVID-19.
Right, now, turning over to Twindemic, as we have just reported, has the world ever seen something like this in the past? I mean, COVID-19 is definitely a new virus, and what can we expect? When can we expect it to begin?
I think the term twindemic was just coined. I mean, after this COVID-19 pandemic, and also we have in the past we experienced some flu pandemic. Like 100 years ago, we experienced the Spanish flu, and some decade ago we also observed the flu, another the flu a pandemic. So the term twindemic was actually coined after this the flu pandemic and also this COVID-19 pandemic. So but this twindemic is not this world was actually just circulating even just 2 years ago, and that the people concerned when we are approaching the fall or just the winter season, there might be some double infection like COVID-19, also just the flu infection. The flu is normally just we experience in the fall and the winter season. And there was some concern, but the number of cases was not really just not many so far, because people are just get used to just wearing just the masks because of the all just some personal just behavior and hygiene. So we did not see just many just the sort of just double infection cases. But then there was some small cases, for example, like COVID-19 and plus just a respiratory syncytial virus infection. And also, this is the human case, and then also some in animal experiment, there was some COVID-19 plus some influenza virus infection. The number of cases are very small, but the scientists actually just observed the maybe the symptoms, the prognosis was really just worse compared to the single infection.
And well, Professor, how can the country really prepare for the twindemic then? Is the current medical system able to withstand such pressure?
Well, the concern is that most of the deaths, I mean, especially for the COVID-19, we actually observed that most of the deaths occurred in some unvaccinated person and also elderly person and then the immunocompromised patient. But the good thing is that for the COVID-19 and then the flu, we have very good, just very effective vaccines and then drugs available. So for the preventive measures, I think just a vaccination for just COVID-19 and the flu are very highly just encouraged, and especially for some very vulnerable people, including the elderly and then the immunocompromised people, we are actually just encouraging just wearing masks during the fall and the winter seasons.
Right, and people can't wait until they get their masks off, but it seems like we'll have some time before that with the fall coming. Well, thank you so much, as always, for being with us this morning. It's always a pleasure to speak with you. Hope to speak to you again soon.
Thank you.
Well, that brings us to the end of our first half of New Day at Arirang.
But do stay tuned because we have more stories coming up for you in our second half. Also, an analysis on whether this prolonged inflation will continue around the world.
That's right. As economists warn of a recession in the US and Europe's headed for a downward trajectory in economic growth, we turn to two experts to get their insights on this. So we'll be back straight after the break.
Share South Korea's experience in tackling COVID-19 and introduce a Korean new Korean survivor of Japan's wartime sex slavery met with
extraordinary climate crisis and pledged to work with the EU to tackle the challenge.
The objective of its North Korea policy is
protesters gathering across the country to peacefully demand an end to hate and violence.
Arirang, what matters?
Feel so good right now. Maybe I had a drink or two, but this somehow feels like it's forever. All my friends are here having fun and feeling good right now. Maybe this is forever. All my friends are here having fun and feeling good right now. Forever.
Welcome back to New Day at Arirang. At the 74th Primetime Emmy Awards, Squid Game director won Outstanding Directing for a drama series. Lee Jung-jae won Best Actor.
This comes after the Netflix show already bagged 4 Primetime Creative Arts Emmys. Kim Hyun-sung has the full details.
Squid Game has bagged 2 more wins at the Emmy Awards. Director Hwang Dong-hyuk is bringing home the Outstanding Directing for a Drama Series honor, while lead actor Lee Jung-jae clinched the award for Best Actor in Drama. Director Hwang is the first Korean and first director of a non-English series to win an Emmy title for Best Directing. And Lee Jung-jae wrote history as the first Asian to win an Emmy as the lead actor.
Now I'm looking forward to coming up with lots of ideas and working on them freely so they can be enjoyed by many people all around the world.
The 74th Primetime Emmy Awards kicked off in LA at 6 p.m. Monday local time. At the start of the evening, the cast and crew of Squid Game were waiting for announcements in a total of 6 categories. Jung Woo-yeon, who played Kang Jae-byuk, was up for Outstanding Supporting Actress, while actor Park Hae-soo, who played Cho Sang-woo, and Oh Young-soo, who played Oh Il-nam, were both nominated for the Outstanding Supporting Actor. All are to return empty-handed. The show was also nominated for Best Writing and for the Emmys' crown jewel Outstanding Drama Series. But with Monday's wins, Squid Game now has a total of 6 Emmy Awards and 14 nominations. Earlier this month, the show secured the 4 other Emmys during the Primetime Creative Arts Emmy Awards, which honors stellar artistic and technical achievements. And as the first non-English series to win an Emmy, the history-making Squid Game is to return soon, with the director Hwang Dong-hyuk confirming plans for season 2. Kim Hyun-sung, Arirang News.
Now over in Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelensky says his country is gaining momentum in the war. He claims Ukrainian forces have retaken some 6,000 square kilometers of territory from Russia this month alone. Shin Se-byuk has the details.
Ukraine troops continue to win back territory from Russia as they continue with their counteroffensive. In his late address on Monday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky highlighted the country's recent territorial gains.
Since the first days of September and until today, our warriors have liberated more than 6,000 square kilometers of the territory of Ukraine in the south and in the east. The advances of our forces continue.
Since the Russian offensive first began in late February, Russia has taken control of around a fifth of Ukraine, or about 120,000 square kilometers. Last Thursday, Zelensky said Ukrainian forces had retaken 1,000 square kilometers. On Sunday, it tripled to 3,000. And on Monday, some 6,000 square kilometers of Russian-held territory has been reclaimed, the size that's approximately equivalent to the combined area of the West Bank and Gaza. Moscow has admitted losing key cities in the northeastern Kharkiv region, but described its troop withdrawal in recent days as a regrouping with the aim of focusing on the Luhansk and Donetsk region. Meanwhile, President Zelensky, in the same speech, called on the West to speed up deliveries of weapon systems. The Western allies, including the US and the UK, have pledged to supply Ukraine with more than $16 billion worth of weapons. However, according to a German think tank, only half of that has been delivered so far due to logistical challenges and concerns among the allies that their own stocks are running low. Shin Se-byuk, Arirang News.
It's time for Global Insight. US consumer prices once again surged in August, further stirring up inflation amid rising costs for rent and healthcare. Inflation, it seems, is everywhere, though different in nature. Economies across Asia, Europe and the United States are experiencing rising price levels that central banks have been chasing for months, but to no avail. As the Ukraine war continues, holding up energy supplies for Europe and job market figures and persistent inflation in the US point towards a hard landing recession, the outlook for the world economy is largely pessimistic. The chief of the European Central Bank, Christine Lagarde, said economic growth in the area is facing a really dark downside scenario. So just how downward are we talking, and how will this affect the world economy? To discuss these issues, we're joined by Christopher Hartwell, Professor of International Business Policy at Seoul School of Management and Law, and Tuan Nguyen, US economist at RSM. Very warm welcome to you both. Thank you for joining us. And well, my first question to you, Professor Hartwell. Now, several European countries, including the region's largest economy, Germany, built up a decades-long dependence on Russian energy. Just how much did major European industries depend on Russian gas to grow their economies, and which industries are being affected the most at the moment?
Yeah, now this is a very good question, because it puts into kind of perspective the fact that Germany, Austria, Italy, Hungary, even France to some extent, have really been living on borrowed time when it comes to energy from Russia, that there hasn't been any move towards diversification. There hasn't been any move towards weaning themselves off of what was inherently an unstable country, an authoritarian country, which people had seen long time coming. I mean, we had seen Crimea in 2014 and the first invasion of Ukraine. There's been plenty of time to kind of move away from sole reliance on Russia, but it hasn't been done. And kind of concurrent with this has been this rush towards renewables and green energy and a transition which honestly isn't quite ready yet. So they've been operating underneath this umbrella of Russian gas for a long time. We see industries and sectors such as metals, such as mining, more indirect in terms of kind of processing, textiles, even food, have become addicted to this Russian energy source. It's going to hurt with Russia turning off the taps. It can diversify. Germany, other countries in the EU can diversify, but it's something that they should have done a long time ago.
And Dr. Twin, well, the US, it seems to be seeing consumer consumer spending sort of trimming down, but we saw consumer prices spike again very unexpectedly in August. And well, US rental inflation as well, it's been growing as shelter costs rose about 0.7%, and that actually marked the biggest monthly increase since 1991. What do you make of these different signals? Do you think consumer prices will start to subside?
After a year and a half of robust growth in the U.S. since 2020, I think the U.S. is heading toward a slower growth period due to inflation and tightening monetary policy from the Federal Reserve. However, consumer spending is still on a very solid ground due to a strong labor market that we're having at the moment. Now, the labor market is so strong at the moment that the Federal Reserve should worry about wage inflation, another type of inflation that everybody is talking about. But the strong labor market gives a very solid foundation for spending because it gives somewhat stable wage income for consumers at the moment. But again, that does not come without a hefty price tag in terms of wage inflation. We begin to see some of that impact in today's inflation data, especially when you look at the core inflation components, when you strip out energy, when you strip out food inflation, food prices. And I think with today's data, we can continue to see the inflation fight to last a little bit longer.
And Dr. Yuan, how do you see the risk of gas prices spiking again for US consumers?
In my opinion, gas prices and energy prices in general are still too high compared to the pre-pandemic level. However, in my opinion, I don't think there's going to be a similar significant spike in gasoline energy prices as the one we saw at the onset of the Ukraine war. However, the geopolitical uncertainties around the Ukraine war, the slowdown of the Chinese economy, and the incoming recession in Europe, I think gasoline prices and energy prices will continue to be highly volatile.
And Professor Hartwell, as Europe faces a cost of living crisis, Germany, Sweden, France and Britain, they all announced sweeping billion-dollar relief measures to ease the strain on households and businesses, as well as rationing and conservation plans. Do you think these plans are actually going to work?
Disaster. Absolutely disastrous plans. First off, you see what you have in the United States. Today, Biden was doing his victory lap on this Inflation Reduction Act, when in reality it's going to be the Inflation Acceleration Act. It's going to be pumping more money into the economy at a point where it's already overheating. You're going to have the exact same effect if you do this in Europe. We've had 14 years of far too accommodative monetary policy. The global financial crisis was 14 years ago, and we've had zero interest rates, we've had asset buybacks, we've had just quantitative easing infinity, just flooding the markets with liquidity. If you're going to go this fiscal route now, you're augmenting monetary policy, which is still too accommodative. We're starting to get off the zero lower bound. That's fantastic. We should have done that a long time ago. But capital isn't being priced accordingly, and now we're adding fiscal stimulus on top of this. Like you said, it's going to be a hard landing. And any type of cushion that is being proposed now in terms of more spending, more fiscal accommodation, is just going to prolong the agony in the long term.
And Dr. Yuan, well, the Eurozone, the United States and China, they all together account for roughly 2/3 of the planet's economic activity. And if these powerhouses slow down, then it would be hard for any country in the world to remain somewhat insulated from the fallout. So how do you think East Asian economies, including South Korea's, would be affected?
East Asian countries like South Korea and Japan share a lot of similarities with the U.S. economy. So historically speaking, whenever we see a slowdown in the U.S. economy, we see a spillover effect on developed countries like South Korea and Japan. However, at the moment, I think the more concerning problems is via the exchange rate channel. As the US dollar continues to become stronger against the Korean won and the Japanese yen, a stronger dollar essentially means a weaker Korean won and a weaker Japanese yen, putting more pressure on the central banks of those two countries in terms of monetary policies when you have to balance between growth and inflation and further complicate the inflation problems in Korea and Japan.
Right, and South Korea's own Bank of Korea governor actually said that the country's monetary policy is independent from the government, but it's not independent from the US Fed. And Dr. Rein, well, the Fed's expected to raise rates again at its next meeting. And do you think it's going to gradually slow down the pace of its rate hikes, or do you think it's going to continue with this aggressive approach?
Given today's data on CPI and inflation, I think another aggressive interest rate increase of 75 basis points has been cemented. However, until November, we still have a lot of time and a lot of data points coming out. And we all know by now that the Federal Reserve has been very data-driven. So we think potentially the Federal Reserve could potentially slow down to 50 basis point rate hikes in the last two meetings of the year, bringing the policy rate to around 4%, or a little bit above 4% by year's end. Now, even though we see a slowdown to 50 basis points, to put into historical context, is still very aggressive. And I think that any kind of speculation, very important, that beyond that timeline, the 3-month timeline, should be politely dismissed, because to be honest, even for the Federal Reserve, they don't even know that what they will do in the next 6 or 12 months, because again, they have to be data driven. And I think the Fed has sent a very clear message to everybody in the market that it will not stop being aggressive until inflation is meaningful under control.
And well, Professor Hartwell, the European Central Bank last Thursday, they raised their key interest rates by 75 basis to 0.75% from zero and lifted its main refinancing rate to 1.25%, which is the highest level for both rates since 2011. And well, do you think this is going to help cool down price levels at all?
Well, the problem is that the EU, the ECB, is always following the Fed. It's always playing catch up. The Fed is primus inter pares, first among equals when it comes to setting kind of global monetary policy. The ECB is playing catch up. The ECB did a lot more in terms of its quantitative easing policies, in terms of its asset buybacks, in terms of intervening in corporate bond markets, for example. I think, and the ECB has also not signaled, just like Professor Nguyen said, the same kind of aggressiveness that the U.S. Federal Reserve has. The ECB has always been more dovish. They've always been more willing to accommodate a little bit more inflation for a little less unemployment, kind of your famous Phillips curve relationship. I think the problem within the Eurozone is that inflationary expectations are becoming steadily entrenched. And once that happens, then you're going to have self-fulfilling prophecies when it comes to inflation. If inflationary expectations are going to be ratcheting up, then it's going to be much more difficult for the ECB to kind of to slow walk its rate rises like it's doing now. And I think just coming off of the zero lower bound, coming up to 0.75 is nowhere near enough to kind of dislodge these expectations, because they are becoming entrenched.
Professor Hartwell, really not helping the situation is Russian gas company really fiddling around with the gas supplies going to Europe. And well, do you see Russian President Vladimir Putin as weaponizing energy as a strategy to really disintegrate European unity, as many Western leaders are saying? And if so, as long as this strategy continues, then how do you think Europe will really have to safeguard its economy?
Well, I mean, Putin has been doing this for 20 years. He's been using energy as a weapon. He's made no secret of he wishes to wield it as a weapon. I mean, all of the Russian economy is subordinated to political aims underneath Vladimir Putin. Politics first, economics later. So this isn't really a surprise. What Vladimir Putin has done, and someone posted this on Twitter earlier today, they said that he has to be a CIA plant because he is starting to wean Germany and Western Europe off of Russian gas. He's forged Ukrainian unity. He's revitalized NATO. He's just been brilliant for Western Europe. And I think this is something we really have to consider, is that, as I mentioned at the beginning, Germany would have continued to be heavily dependent on Russian gas, probably in perpetuity. This is Merkel's legacy. But the fact of the matter is now that Finland, Germany, Austria, Italy, France know that they have to diversify. Latvia especially know that they have to diversify away from Russian gas. So the more that Putin wields the weapon of energy, the less effective it is going to be in the future.
And Dr. Yuan, while revisiting what Professor Hartwell said, do you think President Joe Biden's plan to grow the bio industry in America, do you think it's really going to help with the economic situation in America at all?
So I think the industrial policies in America right now can potentially help with the productivity problems that we have been seeing in the U.S. in the past couple of years. That whenever we have supply problems and the demand problems, investing in productivity, investing in new technologies is going to be the move forward, especially to tame inflation, because we all want to see that supply chain disruption going away. We all want to see that productivity measure going up.
Right, I see. Well, two conflicting opinions there. And well, in the meantime, Professor Hartwell, in Germany, though, being at very much the heart of the European economy, if it does experience a slowdown in growth, then what would it mean for the rest of the Eurozone?
Well, the joke with the United States always was the United States sneezes and Latin America catches a cold. I think you probably see something fairly similar within the Eurozone especially, but in the broader European Union. But I think there's been, where we live in interesting times, I think there's been a great kind of, not deglobalization, but kind of decoupling from global supply chains that's been occasioned by COVID-19. There's been a lot more kind of looking inward. So I think the linkages, the financial linkages are there, but some of the trade and cross-border linkages, which people took for granted before COVID-19, are very slowly coming back online. So I don't think there's going to be the same kind of amount of contagion. That being said, Germany is the largest engine of growth within the Eurozone, within the EU. So it will cause problems especially for countries like Poland, which heavily rely on Germany. But I think there's enough of a realization of what can happen in a crisis situation, again, shown by COVID-19, that there's a bit more resilience in the system than there was before.
I see, and well, obviously South Korea isn't going to be insulated from the impact as the US and EU economies really take a hit. And well, I'm afraid this is where we'll have to leave the interview today. That was Christopher Hartwell, Professor of International Business Policy at Seoul School of Management and Law, and Tuan Yuan, US economist at RSM. Thank you both so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For a look at news from around the world, we now turn to our Matthew Ashley standing by at the Arirang newsroom. Good morning.
Good morning to you guys.
Let's start in the UK as the Queen's coffin has arrived at Buckingham Palace.
Well, that's right, Doyon. Following her lie at rest in Scotland, the body of Queen Elizabeth II has been taken to London. Now, the state hearse passed through the gates of Buckingham Palace on Tuesday evening, local time. Moving forward, the body of the UK's longest reigning monarch will be moved from the palace to Westminster Hall during a ceremonial procession on Wednesday. Now, starting at 2:22 p.m, the coffin will take a roughly 40-minute journey, marked by 1-minute interval gunfire and viewing areas for spectators. At Westminster Hall, a 4-day lie-in state period from Wednesday 5 p.m. to Monday 6:30 a.m. will allow the general public to pay their respects to the late Queen. Now, after closing, the official funeral will take place the same day at Westminster Abbey. The funeral will bring a national 10-day period of mourning to a close. Now, Twitter shareholders have approved Elon Musk's $44 billion buyout for the social media platform. The decision followed a vote on Tuesday, which now gives the company clearance to pursue the Tesla CEO in court to push through the deal he made to buy the company in April. In May, Musk did a U-turn, saying he had been misled over the number of spam and bot accounts on the site. The two sides are due to meet in court next month, where a judge will determine whether to enforce the deal or not. Meanwhile, on the same day, Twitter's former head of security, Peter Zatko, testified before the U.S. Senate, where he accused Twitter of, quote, misleading the public over security standards. Zatko also said Twitter knowingly added Indian intelligence agents to its list of employees, as well as at least one Chinese agent.
Who were disturbed that in a country where...
Now, Kenya has a new president following the swearing-in of William Ruto. In an official ceremony in the capital, Nairobi, on Tuesday, the self-proclaimed hustler was sworn in. This follows a close election win against opposition candidate Raila Odinga, where Ruto took 50.5% of the vote and his opponent took 48.8%. Now, the election results were contested by Odinga, but Kenya's Supreme Court ruled last week that the election was free and fair. Kenya's new leader will need to tackle an economic crisis that's marked by surging fuel and food costs, as well as high unemployment.
I want to thank God because...
And in our final story, the godfather of France's new wave cinema scene, Jean-Luc Godard, died on Tuesday. The legendary filmmaker was 91. According to a family representative, Godard died by assisted suicide at his home in Switzerland, where the procedure is legal. The director made the choice after suffering multiple serious illnesses. The French-Swiss director was a key figure in the Nouvelle Vague, or New Wave, the movement that revolutionized cinema in the late 1950s and 60s. Now, his works influenced many Hollywood big names, including Martin Scorsese and Quentin Tarantino. Godard had more than 100 films to his names, with his most recent work, The Image Book, released in 2018.
Good morning, I'm Lee Ji-young with the latest weather updates. It's a wet and gray start in the capital, and on and off light rain is expected in the capital and the west coast through the first half of the day. So Jeju Island could see 10 to 40 millimeters of rainfall into Friday, and due to the indirect effect of Typhoon Muifa, the island and the south coast is under a strong wind advisory this morning. And now the Korean Peninsula needs to brace for another of the season's typhoons, Namnador. The tropical depression is moving northward over waters east-southeast of Okinawa, and it could come close to southeast waters of Seogwipo on Jeju by dawn next Monday, and we'll be sure to keep you updated. Well, temperature-wise, morning lows are a couple of degrees higher than yesterday here in Seoul, while southern regions are seeing morning temperatures that are 3 to 5 degrees higher than seasonal norms. Then those of us in Seoul and surrounding regions will see sunnier skies returning by the time we head out for lunch today. And highs will be 2 to 4 degrees higher than Tuesday nationwide. And notice how warm it's going to be over in Gwangju, topping out at 31 degrees Celsius this afternoon. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe.
That wraps up our newscast for this hour. We'll be back tomorrow, though, for our Thursday's edition of New Day at Arirang.
Thanks for joining us this morning, and do tune in to our later newscast for updates throughout the day. Have a lovely day or evening wherever you are. Goodbye.